Believe it or not, pitchers and catchers are reporting in Florida and in Tucson for baseball. It's snowing here in Nebraska. We say we go inside and let's find out who our guest is this week, because it's a lot warmer in there than it is out here in the snow.
Live from the frozen tundra of North Dakota, this is the Scribe's Journey with your host, Richard Paulinelli.
Hey, I told you we were going to be out on location sooner or later, and unfortunately it's still a little too cold outside, so we're obviously at a library. And the reason why I chose a library is this can be a very huge resource for you, whether or not you are a nonfiction writer or a fiction writer. Obviously, for nonfiction, you're going to be doing some research. Not everything is going to be found on Google. Trust me, I know. The two books I wrote, the two nonfiction, Perfection's Arbiter from the Fields, I went to libraries in Sacramento, California, Modesto, California, Turlock, California, and down at Cal State Northridge in Los Angeles to get the information I needed to write those two books. There's an author who's coming up here fairly soon. Her name is Tosca Lee. She spent 5 years and employed a team of researchers to go through and research for one book, and it was a historical fiction, but it was important enough that you get the history right, and that's kind of the key here. Make sure you get your history right, because if you don't, your story's going to fall flat for people who know what the history is. Now, there is one subset of that called alternate history, but even though you're changing history, for example, say like the man in the High Castle, Philip Dick's story about what America would have been like had Nazi Germany not been defeated in the 40s. That's alternate history, but you still need to be accurate with your history leading up to the point where the split happens. Now, alternate history is a very popular genre right now. There's a lot of people writing alternate history. But again, go do your homework. Reason why that's kind of apropos for today's episode is we have a history professor. Now, he doesn't just teach American history, he teaches world history as well. His name is Jason Bieber. Let's bring him on. Let's talk to him about actual history, writing historical fiction, writing historical nonfiction, and what you need to do to make sure you get it all right. Let's check out a couple of messages. We'll be back in about a minute.
My name is Detective Tommy Nolan, and I am a saint.
Okay, welcome back to A Scribe's Journey. We are back with our guest tonight, who is a history professor in Ohio, and I believe he teaches at more than one school, so we'll get into that here in just a second, but let's real quick go through his biography and find out who we're talking to tonight. He is a military historian with a PhD from Florida State University, focusing on civil-military relations and grand strategy. He specializes in Imperial Germany during the oh, I'm going to blow this, Wilhelmine and World War One era. We'll get him to pronounce that one correctly. He has taught history and military history courses at Florida State, the University of Dayton, Central State, and Wittenberg University. He is currently working on a book manuscript proposal for the creation of the Schlieffen Plan. I think I got that one right. The German war plan leading into the First World War and its impact on civil, military, and Army Navy budgeting issues prior to the breakout of the war in 1914. He's also interested in general with the evolution of the concepts of grand strategy, the revolutions in military affairs, both industrial and post-industrial versions, and the development of combined arms warfare in the modern era. And he's going to chat with me a little bit about history, but let's for now welcome Jason Bieber.
Welcome. Thank you for bringing me on the show. I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you on. Jason and I are good friends. This is the first time we are meeting face to face, and let me just say, we picked a lousy day to do this because we've got weather issues. It seems to be messing with our connection. So I apologize for the video issues we're going to have, but Jason's sounding good, so we're going to go ahead and plow through this. Jason and I usually, as you can see, we're adorned in baseball.
Yep. As you can see, I'm a pretty big Mets fan. I
talk to him even though I do the Rockies, but pitchers and catchers are reporting today, so we decided we need to.
I hope you guys sign Arenado, by the way.
As do I, because we've lost enough players as it is. Thank you very much. Jason's Mets are down in Florida. I think they still train in Port St. Lucie, and my Rockies are down in Tucson. And whenever the Rockies and the Mets play, we're frenemies, but we're still cool. We also talk hockey, and we do also talk history, mostly military history, but we get into some other areas as well. So I'm really looking forward to this show. Jason, like I said, you're a military historian. So as a professor, you've got students who are writing papers, let's call them mini books, and they have to present this to you, and you're going to go through the editing process and see if they've got it right or not. So if we can apply this to writers, whether or not you're writing nonfiction or historical fiction or even alternate history, as a historian, what do you want to see the writer doing to make sure that they present a story that is true to history and in addition to being believable?
Well, the first thing is, number one, make sure that you're doing the research right. That's the first thing. And you want to be able to place yourself in the time frame of whatever historical topic you're talking about. So in other words, if you're, let's say, looking at the Battle of Gettysburg, you want to be able to look at it from both the Union and Confederate side, understand how they fought the battle, why they fought the battle, and on top of that, place everything in its proper context and order. And a lot of people look at history from the standpoint of, that, why didn't they do this or why didn't they do that? And it's always from hindsight. It's always from hindsight. Being a Mets fan for me is always fun because I should have been a Yankees fan. I would have won way more titles. No. Then again, I grew up in the 80s, so, context matters, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that being said, what really, really is important is the ability to place yourself in that historical context. For instance, George Washington should not be mocked for having wooden teeth. Or should we look at Abraham Lincoln's top hat as a funny thing? No, we shouldn't, because this is what they had at the time, and this is what they used at the time.
Right.
So, and I see this a lot. The term I would use for that is presentism, viewing everything through the lens of the present. So if you do anything historical, recognize the options that they had at the time, not after the fact.
Right. Now, you bring up a pretty good point, because I see a lot of authors, and I see a lot of people in general, but authors in particular, they tend to bring a 21st or even a late 20th century point of view to what was going on when they were writing about the 17th or 18th or 19th century. And they also bring the
kind of the judgments and the morals that we have that we consider the norm now, but wasn't back then. How do you get one of your students, or in this case, an author, to not do that so that they're bringing an accurate portrayal of the time period they're writing about?
Well, number one, the best thing to do is look at the actual sources themselves. I mean, I'll go back to Gettysburg. You'd want to read, the memoirs of the people involved in it. You'd want to read the official history, you read the official records of the War of the Rebellion. You'd want to also look at other really good, academic secondary sources that do a good job of analyzing, the battle or the campaign or the whatever. And this goes for anything in history. It doesn't have to be, strictly military history is what I would roughly do. Anything, and you have to look at the options that were available, not only at the time, but also, get the bird's eye view at the same time. Okay, why did, the Confederates mess up on the second day of Gettysburg? Or why didn't the Germans, do a better counterattack at D-Day or something like that? So you have to, it's a balancing act, and you have to know where to draw the line. Sometimes you might even call it an art.
Right. Yeah. And you bring up a point, because I enjoy reading about the Civil War period. There was a book I read. I cannot remember the author's name, but the title of the book was called Mr. Lincoln's War, or Mr. Lincoln Goes to War. And
probably McPherson. Probably Dean McPherson. Was it Tried by War?
No, it was a very small book.
It wasn't that one.
It probably wasn't, but he came from it from the standpoint of Abraham Lincoln was the most evil monster that walked the earth, which is, for some Southerners, at that time, he was the devil personified. And I get that, but if you're going to write a book and present it as a look at a time period in history, you can't bring that kind of bias, because it was clear to me that this guy, even though he's 150, 160 years removed from everything, he would cheerfully probably gone and shot Lincoln all over again. And I compare that to Shelby Foote's narrative, which I'm sure you've read.
I've read most of it. It's incredibly long.
But you come out of that with a full understanding of both sides.
Yeah.
And it's balanced, and you could tell Shelby took his time and presented, this is what this side was thinking, this is what this side was thinking, this is why they did what they did. And he also examined a little bit about what went wrong. To me, Shelby Foote is the do it this way, and this other guy is what not to do.
Yeah, Shelby Foote is one of the seminal historians for that. He's one of the go-to sources on the Civil War. And some of it's been a little supplanted by a little bit more modern work, but that doesn't take away his position as one of the guys who's really, he's basically pulling it away from maybe the past and refight it, which is one of the things I think that, the book you talk about was essentially doing. Trying to place themselves in the Civil War, maybe for political reasons, maybe for Southern provincial reasons. But I think that might be what the other book was trying to do.
Yeah. So if you had an author come to you and say, okay, I want to focus on, let's pick one that you're an expert on. You want to focus on World War I, the events leading up to it. What advice are you going to give them coming into this project?
Well, the first one I would tell them is I would ask them what they want to do with it. What specifically they want to focus, because it is a sprawling conflict it spans multiple continents and multiple years, and different things happen at different times. So I would ask them, you're going to want to narrow things down to a specific point in time, and then I can help them find more specific detail, whatever the heck they're looking for.
Right. Now, I know I myself have written what would be considered two historical nonfictions, but they're both sports related. One was baseball related, which should not surprise anybody, but it was focused on one umpire, his life and career. So that was not that hard to do because there was enough information there. The other spanned a 95-year time frame. And from the time I got serious about writing it and started research to the time it got released, you're talking 2 years. So would you say if somebody wants to go in and do historical nonfiction, to expect to spend quite a lot of time just on the research alone to get a good book?
Absolutely. I mean, the research, obviously there's a point where you're going to have to say, even as a researcher, I've done enough work.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same point, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're trying to look at, let's say, one battle, let's say the Battle of the Somme, you could easily do research on, maybe a few months worth of research on that, and then you can get your way through it. But if you want to do something that's like going to span the entire conflict, then you're looking at having to read a lot of works. And on top of it, no matter what you do, you're going to have people nitpicking, anything you do with history.
Yeah.
So at some point, what you really have to do is know when to say, this is going to work for my story. As long as you're not putting lightsabers in, the trenches of World War I.
Why not?
Well, they didn't exist. Well, by the way, there's a really nice tidbit from the video game Battlefield 1. The people who are making it for EA, surprisingly enough, EA made a good game, which is rare. But they had a lot of experimental weapons that they have in the game. And so historians and people like history buffs came to them and said, hey, you have all these World War I guns that were not really used in the war or were just prototypes or maybe showed up at the very end of the war, even after maybe 1919. And the people who made it, DICE EA, they said, yeah, we know that. There's only one problem. They're really cool guns. We like them.
Okay, which would be my nitpick is if you're going to write about history, be accurate, please. For me, and it was one thing I noticed from the fields, is that there were times when you come up to a point where you have to make a decision on how you're going to proceed with what you're writing. And I'll give you the example. There was From the Fields is about the history of Turlock High School football in my hometown. And there was 2 years. The football program traditionally has always done well, but there was a 2-year period where this one great coach had just stepped down and another coach steps in and he has no chance to succeed. It's just not going to work. And he has 2 horrible years. So as I approach this, I know this person personally and have talked with him and met with him and worked with him. He was an athletic director at the time. I was the sports editor. So now I have a choice. Do I stay true to the subject and accomplish what the book's supposed to accomplish, which was tell the story of the program, or do I softball this and try to take it easy on him? I went with the stay true to the subject, but I didn't dogpile on him. It's harder to hit that balance. And that would be one thing I would suggest is always lean toward an accurate portrayal, but you don't have to dogpile on the guy at the same time. You can do both. It's just not easy to do. Do you see instances where your students are maybe softballing a little bit and not being true to the subject?
Sometimes that happens. I do see sometimes they get excited for topics. Sometimes they also, because they don't have the breadth of research that, let's say, I do, or maybe you do on certain topics, they make leaps of judgment that don't always work. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they get the right work. And one of the things I tell them is, you limit for your sources is at least 3 secondary sources. So I say to them, and these have to be academic sources, so no random website stuff, no Wikipedia, no encyclopedias. Definitely not Encyclopedia Dramatica. But the more sources you have, the more fleshed out it's going to be. So and that helps keep people. I think the more research you've done, the more sources you've looked at, it helps create a more narrowed timeline, and a more narrowed, focused, viewpoint, and it helps. I think maybe to take out the bias. So I say the more the merrier, and obviously there is a cutoff to it, but I do see them when they have limited sources, they narrate the heck out of their story, and it's more about the narration than about the analysis.
Yeah.
Which is where we get, the flights of fancy stuff sometimes.
Yeah, speaking of, now, like I mentioned earlier, alternate history seems to be something that's picking up a lot of steam out there as far as what people want to read. Now, obviously, you're changing history when you do alternate history, but at the same time, you have to preserve some of it to make the story believable. Are there any instances of a book that you've read where either they've done a really great job of doing that, or they've, you're like, what were you thinking? You can't. It's like you said earlier, you can't have a lightsaber pop up in World War One.
Well, first off, as a historian, historians love we call it counterfactuals. What ifs in history. So we don't necessarily call it, alternate history. But the what ifs they're part of history, because the options that are available, all the options you have to think about. You have to think, what if at Gettysburg, what if General Lee did that, or what if Meade did this, and looking at it from the options that are available. Now again, if it's not available to them, then don't do that. But if it is available to them, like what if Lee, instead of doing Pickett's charge, simply left after the second day of Gettysburg? Or what if the Union decided to attack on the third day? These were options that were available to them. In that case, historians love looking at them because the counterfactuals actually allow historians to understand not only what could have happened, but why what happened did happen.
Yeah.
So it helps underscore the reality of history in many respects. So I really don't have a problem with alternate history. As long as you're not going off the wall with it. Now, that being said, I do like Harry Turtledove's works. Harry Turtledove is fun. He does a really good job with even Zanzi stuff like aliens in World War II.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, I think that's. I haven't read that one, but that could be the one where they're trying to find that bell that the Germans had in this one factory, and people are swearing up and down it was a time traveling machine.
It's not that one. But his World War II alien invasion series, it's basically the aliens come and try to invade Earth, but it turns out the aliens expected humanity to still be basically knights on horseback. And we're finding out, well, crap, the Americans and British and the Japanese and German, they've got tanks. They've got warplanes. And the alien technology was basically maybe mid-21st century, a little better than ours, and they had limited resources to fight everyone at once. So he played it well. I actually think he did a really good job with that. Although it was really weird having, in the series, a bunch of cities get nuked by the aliens, including American cities and German cities. And Hitler, of all things, is saying, in the series, we stand with our American brethren after their cities have been destroyed. So it's incredulous, but he made it work.
Right. Well, that's kind of a common theme. I mean, people have always said, it would be interesting to see what the nations of planet Earth would do if a hostile alien force showed up on our front door and started shooting at us. Well, would all of a sudden all those,
Sorry, I had to make that joke.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, it just would we band together and forget, the fact that we're supposed to be at war here and there and everywhere, or would we just keep right on going after we got rid of them? It's interesting to kind of sit back and think about.
It is. Although that being said, I mean, in those type of situations, war breeds strange bedfellows. In World War II, the United States and Britain, these arch capitalist countries. In fact, Britain's an empire. They allied with the Soviet Union, which was a communist country, which was busy killing millions of its own people. But that being said, ironically enough, Stalin was an external pacifist. He did not want war. But you could see strange bedfellows sometimes work, and of course the classic phrase, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend."
Yeah.
So I think that we probably see a lot of that. But at the same point, I think it would be one of those lovely moments. You remember the movie Independence Day?
Oh yeah.
Remember the scene where everybody's hanging out in the Middle East, all the air forces are there, and this was obviously the 90s, so the Iraqis and the Israelis are looking at each other like dagger eyes, but the British Air Force is there too, and they're like, we all need to work together to fight the common enemy. I think that would actually work. I think we'd actually see stuff like that of, hey, you guys like bagels? We like hummus? At least we don't have 6 eyes.
That probably would be. You reminded me. I think it was Philip Dick who wrote "The Man in the High Castle," which is basically what America would look like if we had lost World War II. That's a pretty big what if.
Yeah, although it depends. Based on what I know as a historian, Germany barely had the logistical capability to do anything in Russia. The Operation Barbarossa in 1941, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, they really couldn't do it. Logistically speaking, they're rolling the dice, and they needed a very specific number, and any other number basically means calamity, and they get any other number combination. Yeah. So, well, I know a lot of people like the whole idea of the massive German empire coming out of World War II, and maybe had Germany won, they would be able to do something like that 20, 30 years down the line. But the odds are no, they probably wouldn't.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the U.S. at some point would have the atomic bomb.
Yeah. In fact, you and I think, kind of did our own little what if on if the United States, if Japan hadn't attacked Pearl Harbor, with the delay of the U.S. getting into World War II, it mattered. And I think we kind of hashed it out and came to the conclusion that there was just no way that Germany could fight a two-front war and sustain it.
Well, the big thing for me is that a lot of people forget it's not just the United States getting involved in World War II against the Germans. It's also the fact that it can't beat the Soviets, at least not quickly. It becomes blindingly obvious that at some point the British are just going to activate the empire. If Japan doesn't do anything, if they're just hanging out in China and doing really gross and disgusting things in China, India and Canada, all roads lead to Rome, or the new Rome in this case, London, and they would resupply, Britain, and the empire would effectively save the British war effort. Right. I could have seen it happening, but that would be an interesting counterfactual.
Yep.
Swimming on the beach in Normandy by Indian soldiers.
Now in your introduction, we mentioned that you are working on a book of your own. It's going to be nonfiction, correct?
Yes, it's going to be a academic work. Title I'm still working on, although I would, as a massive nerd, I would love to write the title as "There are dragons in this book. Please buy it."
That would probably, you probably get a few sales.
I would.
So tell us a little bit about what it's about, because I have many years ago.
Got a little bit of a freeze up there.
Yeah, we're just kind of plow through it as best we can on that one. The Schleifen thing, I remember reading about it, but this was a long time ago. So just kind of give us a a quick preview of it, if you can, without giving away too many spoilers?
Say that again a little bit. I mean, I got a little bit of a break up there. I apologize.
That's okay. The weather's killing us. The book you're working on, it focuses on the Schleifen plan. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Yeah,
Well, focus on the Schlieffen plan.
Okay, there you go. So tell us a little bit about it.
Well, the Schlieffen plan was the German plan, essentially, to set up World War One, or at least the beginning of that war. The plan was designed to mass German units along the German, Belgian, and French border, and to invade essentially through Belgium and try to surround the entire French army. It was an audacious move that was probably a little bit beyond what the Germans could do in World War One. But the thing is that it's not just that Germany's coming up with war plans. So is France. So is Russia. So is Austria. So is Serbia. Britain is appending themselves to the French plan. The Italians are kind of picking their nose. They have no strategic plan. Let's put it that way. But what I'm looking at within my own work is why Schlieffen wrote it. It's a combination. He's writing it in basically largely the decade and a half before World War One, and he's writing it to, number one, come up with a plan that Germany could use to win as fast as possible. Everybody wants to win as fast as possible. If you can score 20 runs in a baseball game in the first inning, you're probably going to win.
Usually, yes.
Yes.
Unless you're playing in an old course field with the undoctored baseballs, and then God only knows.
That's possible. But even with 20 runs in the first inning, you're probably going to win.
More often than not.
Well, so the hope was for Germany that they could use this to win basically outright. On top of that, in my own work I'm looking at is I'm placing it in a civil military context, which essentially says that, number one, the German military needed more money. They had really, the last real reform and rearmament period was the 1890s. In the early 1900s, tech development cycles had been jumping at them. They've been messing them up. And on top of that, you've got a big rival, the Navy. Why Germany built a Navy? It's one of those classic examples. Whenever I look at the German Navy in World War One, I get Star Trek V. What does God want with his starship? So that's essentially why the heck does Germany have a Navy? You're a land army. Be a land army. And so it's actually not just a military plan, but it's also a budgetary plan, a cry for money for the army, saying we need more resources. This is the war we have. This is the only way we can win this war. This is the only way we can fight against the Russians and against the French. And if we don't get this type of money, we're going to fight a defensive war against way too many enemies at once, which is ultimately what happens in World War One when they don't win outright.
Right.
So I look at it. I look at it from that standpoint of a combination of military plan and civil military plan to basically ask for more fiscal resources from the Greater Reich, so to speak.
Right. And so it may have been, and correct me if I'm mistaken in this, that he was looking more for getting the money to build up as opposed to, hey, I got this great idea on how we can, beat the French and the Russians at the same time. He was leaning more toward getting the money.
Well, it's a little bit of both, actually. The thing here is that he has to come up with a war-winning plan, because this is the time frame where everyone is planning to go to war one day. And if you come up with a plan and say this isn't going to work, you get fired. So he can't actually say, hey, if we don't get the money, we're probably screwed. He can't say that because he's going to get fired. And by the way, we're not exactly sure about this one, but there's what we call the Moroccan crisis, the first Moroccan crisis. Long story short, Germany saber-rattling over Morocco in 1905, maybe into 1906, and the British and French and other countries are basically blocking Germany from doing anything. The saber-rattling, mostly just saber-rattling. It didn't get beyond, jaw, like people just yelling at each other. But the Germans did have to think about mobilizing just in case. And when the Kaiser and the war minister went over to Schlieffen, they said, "Are you ready for war? If you have to go to war," he said, "Well, of course I am." And then he quickly said, "Crap! Half my artillery is being redesigned. Half my guns are being redesigned. I have an army, but it's being retrofitted." Remember I said about those tech development cycles? They were trying to get on a hold of them, so they didn't have everything in order. All their ducks weren't lined up. So from what I've seen, the Schlieffen may have lost his job because of the real when he had to eventually tell the Kaiser, basically, our army is amazing in 3 years when we're finished fixing our guns and finished fixing our artillery. Please next time talk to us before you decide to tell us we're going to war. We don't know exactly what happened, but it's a possibility he lost his job over that. Which basically goes to the point of, he was right. They needed to get a handle on these things. So if they didn't get a handle on these type of problems, if they kept wasting money on the Navy, which by the way, by 1911, the German interest rates in the federal German banks was closing on like 8% interest rates. So it was, and then it was probably going to go over 10%. Do you want 10% interest rates on basically banknotes? That's insane. So they're realizing that their economy could not sustain the massive naval buildup along with the massive army buildup. So we ultimately see what we call the Army Laws of 1912 and 1913, which start to finally rebuild the German army. The problem is World War I breaks out before they can really take effect.
Yeah.
So, Schlieffen was right.
Yeah. I think history is filled with a lot of people who were giving out the warnings and trying to tell people we need to do something different, and they didn't get listened.
Robert O'Neill in the United States during the 90s. Al Qaeda is going to attack us. What happens? He's there at 9/11 World Trade Center. One of the guys saying, "I told you so," and he dies there. They're trying to save people.
Yeah. It's interesting how you can look back and see so many instances where the signs, the signs were there, and nobody paid attention. So, what are you going to do? Now it's going to be a while before that book would come out. I would assume you still got some.
Well, I've been busy teaching, busy trying to earn money in the meantime and stuff like that. So I'm hopefully going to get a lot more work done on it over the next year, and I'm hopefully within the next 2 years it'll be out. That's my hope.
There you go. Well, you know what? When you get close, we will definitely have you come back on and talk about that book. I'm going to let you go because I am just watching the way this is playing out, and it just looks like it's getting worse, not better. So I think we'll cut it right here. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully next time we won't have this monster thing come through. It bombed the heck out of Omaha, so I can only imagine what you guys.
Oh, and by the way, the publisher who I'm probably working with is the University of Oklahoma Press.
Oh, cool. There you go.
Yeah.
Can't get much better than that.
Unfortunately, my editor is a Penguins fan, so we don't talk about that.
Oh, and by the way, in case anybody's wondering, because I did double check this, he is not related to that person in Canada who shall not be named.
Thank you very much for that one.
There you go.
By the way.
Yeah, I was going to say the less said about a certain former New York Islander who now plays for Toronto, the better. Jason, again, thanks for coming on. We're going to
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much.
Well, appreciate it. And we're going to go ahead and jump off here. We're going to catch a couple of messages, and I'll hop back on here in a minute. We'll get it all wrapped up and call it a week. We'll be right back.
Okay, that was my friend Jason. Thanks for being on the show, Jason. Have to get over to Cincinnati one of these days. We've got some Reds games and some libraries to go digging through. Let's wrap it up. I think we had a pretty good show today. Again, thanks, Jason, for coming on. Thank you for watching, readers. Let's keep reading, writers. Let's keep writing, and keep walking the path of a scribe's journey. We'll see you next time.
This has been a Scribe's Journey with your host, Richard Paulinelli, a Tuscany Bay Productions presentation.